Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fourth day of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. I'm Steve Spode, I'm Head of Ecosystem Management for Welsh Government, and I'm going to be facilitating this morning's session. This morning we'll be covering a range of issues around policy. We'll be looking at the Welsh Government's Section 6 biodiversity duty. We're then looking at how that translates into planning policy through the net benefit approach. And then we'll be looking across the border into England to see about the post-Brexit biodiversity policy context now. And that'll be interesting to see what we can learn from what's going on in England. Before we start, when the talks are going on, if you want to ask questions, do so in the live chat, and we'll gather those together, and we'll put those to the speakers after they're finished speaking. Just to say that the presentations and the presenters' information about them is on the Hoover website. Sorry, I get my head around that, and they're all being recorded, and they'll be available on the Wales Biodiversity Partnership website at the end of after today. So without any further ado, I'm just going to introduce Jeff Robertson, who's the Welsh Government Policy Officer, who's going to talk to you about Section 6 biodiversity duty. Away you go, Jeff. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Steve. And yes, good morning to you, and thank you for joining the session. So my name is Jeff Robinson, and I work in biodiversity policy for Welsh Government, and I lead on the Section 6 duty. Let me just share my screen to bring up the presentation. Great. Is that coming up okay on your screens?
Yep, that's fine.
Steve, that's fine. Great, thanks. Okay, well, so just a brief, the talk is sort of open to everyone, but it's targeted at public authorities, especially those who may sort of lack expertise and knowledge of biodiversity, and are not sure of what they can do to help, both from the point of view of helping biodiversity and what they need to do to actually comply with the duty. So firstly, I'll briefly explain what biodiversity is and why it is important to us, and then I'll go on to talk about the key aspects of the duty and how it can be implemented. This will then be followed by a look at the reporting requirement, including what should be in the report and a possible format that you can follow. I'll then finish with a couple of slides on what can be done to help, together with specific examples from public authorities of actions they have taken. Firstly, what is biodiversity? I mean, put simply, biodiversity is the variety of life found on Earth and includes all species of plants, animals, the habitat, their abundance and genetic diversity. It's all the sort of different kinds of life, the variety of animals, plants, fungi, and microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. Each of these species and organisms work together in ecosystems to maintain and support life. So biodiversity is important not just for its intrinsic value, but also for the crucial contribution it makes to many aspects of our lives. These include purifying air and water, such as through plants absorbing carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, supporting the development and functioning of soils where dead leaves and plants add nutrients to the soil, and burrowing insects and animals help the soil to breathe, supporting people's well-being, as highlighted by the pandemic with the benefits people gained through spending time in green spaces. Also, supporting pollinators. Pollinators such as bees and butterflies are important for food production, with 35% of global food production coming from plants that rely on pollinators. Biodiversity also helps us adapt to the adverse impact of climate change. Increased vegetation cover and less hard landscaping will reduce the potential for flooding from heavier rainfall. A key aspect of recognising its importance is actually valuing it. The benefits that biodiversity brings to us is now increasingly being recognised, but loss of biodiversity is often caused by the failure to account for its true value and its importance to us. For example, is a small piece of local authority-owned woodland worth a nominal few £1,000s? Or is it worth far more for its ability to retain water, improve air quality, the natural health benefits it provides, and also its role as a recreational area. These benefits need to be fully integrated into decision making to reflect the true value of our biodiversity. Tackling the nature emergency, we are all aware of the issues that we face from climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And to help tackle this, the government declared both a nature and climate emergency. The need for this has been highlighted by several reports, including one which noted that 1 in 6 species in Wales are at risk of disappearing. To reverse this decline, it needed to be recognised that biodiversity is intrinsic to our own cultural, economic and social well-being, and that actions to help biodiversity should not be confined to what they directly impact on green spaces and areas set aside for nature. And this required a cultural change in the way we work, and this was a key driver for the 2016 Environment Wales Act. With this background of declining biodiversity and threats to vital ecosystem services, the Act introduced a new legislative delivery framework for the sustainable management of natural resources. Key to this was the need to embed biodiversity considerations into decision making at every level where possible, and to also adopt a more integrated approach to managing our natural resources in order to achieve long-term sustainability. And of course, many actions that help biodiversity will also help us meet the challenges of climate change. So one of the key parts of the Environment Act is the Section 6 biodiversity duty, and this places a legal obligation on public authorities so that they must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity in the exercise of their functions in relation to Wales, and in so doing promote the resilience of ecosystems so far as this is consistent with the proper exercise of those functions. Its purpose is to encourage authorities to be more responsive and proactive in delivering for biodiversity throughout their activities, and to encourage a greater focus on nature and ecosystem resilience within their corporate planning. It's not just about taking actions where authorities are directly responsible for managing green spaces. It's also about embedding biodiversity considerations throughout all of their functions. I mean, some public authorities' work areas might only appear to have a sort of very tenuous link to biodiversity, especially where there is no land management involved. But it's about doing whatever we can, no matter how small, to help biodiversity. And it's this collective action that will make a material difference and help us tackle both the nature and climate emergencies. I'll just break down the wording of the main Section 6 clause in the Act and give a bit more detail about each phrase. Firstly, public authorities are defined in the Environment Act. It is a more expansive definition than public bodies who are subject to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as it includes many smaller organisations. Must seek means taking a proactive approach. In other words, actively looking into what can be done throughout all the authorities' functions. Maintain and enhance biodiversity. This is really any action that helps biodiversity, no matter how small. It can range from only cutting grass in a park once or twice a year to encourage wildflowers, to having a sustainable procurement policy, and or embedding biodiversity considerations into corporate planning. Throughout your work areas, authorities only have to do things through their current functions. It's about how action for biodiversity is delivered through the 16 functions of public authorities. In relation to Wales, means that the duty applies to all public authorities who are not just based in Wales, but ones that are based elsewhere but operate in Wales, an example being Network Rail. Promote the resilience of ecosystems. In essence, a more resilient ecosystem is better able to respond to negative impacts. These impacts could be caused, for example, from issues caused by climate change or resulting from development taking place close to a habitat. So improving resilience could be something like increasing the connectivity between habitats through such as maintaining a hedgerow. And finally, with the proper exercise of those functions, this again highlights that it's not designed to restrict what local authorities do. It's about incorporating biodiversity considerations into what they do. Implementing the duty. It's important to note that Section 6 is not about authorities having to take on new functions. It's more about making changes where possible to existing activities to take into account biodiversity. I say it's about authorities embedding biodiversity and ecosystem considerations into early thinking and business planning, including any policies, plans, programs and projects, as well as their day-to-day activities. I mean, for example, where you're responsible for maintaining a green space, you could consider how it could be managed to benefit biodiversity, such as changing mowing regimes. Another option is where you offer grants. You could include conditions designed to benefit biodiversity, such as requiring applicants to use sustainable products in order to be eligible for the grant or loan. The options open to each authority will vary depending on the size and function, but every action, no matter how small, that in some way contributes to maintaining and enhancing biodiversity will help authorities meet the duty. Before I go and talk about the reporting aspect, I'll just give a brief explanation about the Nature Recovery Action Plan, and in particular its 6 objectives. The NRAP is a key aspect of environmental legislation and policy. It sets out 6 objectives which are designed to reverse the decline in biodiversity, and actions that are taken to comply with the duty should be guided by them. Objective 1, this highlights what is the overarching theme of Section 6, as this is about engaging and supporting participation and understanding to embed biodiversity throughout decision making at all levels. Actions could include incorporating biodiversity into management plans, community engagement, awareness raising activities, and implementing procurement policies that benefit nature. The second objective is about safeguarding species and habitats of principal importance and improve their management. The lists are published under Section 7 of the Environment Act, and the species and habitats are on this list due to their rarity or importance. And these include like local nature sites and sites of special scientific interest, and also protected species such as the pine marten and the Marsh fritillary butterfly. Objective 3 is about increasing the resilience of our natural environment by restoring degraded habitats and habitat creation. This could include changes to the management of green spaces, such as reduced mowing to encourage pollinator-friendly wildflowers. Objective 4, tackling key pressures on species and habitats. Actions that meet this objective could include tackling invasive non-native species like Japanese knotweed and Himalayan balsam, and cutting back on the use of pesticides, so only using them as an absolute last resort. Option 5 is about improving our evidence and understanding and monitoring. This could include seeking expert advice when considering actions that might impact on biodiversity, such as contacting your local nature partnership or getting involved in citizen science projects. And finally, Objective 6, put in place a framework of governance and support for delivery. This could include setting up a committee to consider environmental impact of the authority's work. Right, now on to the planning and reporting requirement. So the next few slides will focus on the reporting requirement, but as a way of encouraging the embedding of biodiversity, the duty requires all public authorities, other than ministers or government departments, to publish a plan of the actions they propose to meet the duty. It also requires all public authorities to produce and publish a report on what they have done to maintain and enhance biodiversity. These reports are required to be published every 3 years, and the first one should have been published by the end of December 2019, and the next one is due at the end of this year. The reporting requirement is important as it's designed to provide transparency and accountability to each public authority's response to the duty, and it's a useful communication tool that publicises the work that is going on. It also sends out a positive message to other organisations and individuals that authorities are taking positive steps to help biodiversity. The report also helps to raise the profile of biodiversity, its importance to many aspects of our lives, and also what can be done to help. So we have published a number of guidance documents on the need to report. These highlight that it's not a prescriptive process, as the duty has been designed to make it as easy as reasonably possible to comply with. I mean, for example, we have published a template for the report's layout, but it's only there as an option, as every authority is free to choose their own way of reporting. Having said that, although the process is not too rigid, it would be helpful to have some consistency to enable comparisons to be made, both between reports and between different reporting rounds. So having said that authorities are free to identify their own ways of reporting, it might be most beneficial if it's done as part of their ordinary reporting processes. One of the key reasons for this is that by including the Section 6 reports in existing reports, this should have the effect of demonstrating how the consideration of biodiversity is being embedded throughout the authority. Also, possibly it does make it more visible when it is in a high-profile corporate document. However, in some cases, it may not be practical as possible for organisations to do this, so there is no issue with producing a separate standalone report. And of course, each authority is free to choose what works best for them. One aspect of the report is that they are also a tool to monitor progress on what is being done to help biodiversity. Therefore, it is easier for them to be monitored and evaluated if they do follow a similar pattern. But as I said, it is a balancing act between allowing authorities flexibility in how they report, but at the same time encouraging some sort of consistency. Whilst there's no need to follow the reporting template, we do suggest that whatever format that is used, it is framed around the 6 Nature Recovery Action Plan objectives I talked about in one of the earlier slides. I say there are a number of guidance documents that have been published to help with the reporting requirement. These include specific guidance on the need to report, an FAQ, and the suggested template. There is also separate guidance for the town and community councils. This is all available on the Welsh Government's website and also the Wales Biodiversity Partnership's website. And the WBP website also has links to reports that were published for the first reporting round. I'll just talk through a suggested layout of the report. I would suggest that start with some information about the authority, referring to its functions, context, and spatial scale, and could also add its key policies, objectives, and performance indicators. This could then be followed by a short description of any highlights, key outcomes, and issues that might have been experienced. And then the main body of the report, this way you should list the actions that have been taken. This should include a brief outline of each policy, project or scheme, and the way it impacts on biodiversity, together with details of what the expected or actual outcome will be. In the same way that, well, as like photos tells 1,000 words, it would be helpful if illustrative material such as infographics, charts, and figures, such as the amount of funding committed, and if possible, case studies illustrating the action are included. Case studies are good to illustrate the actions, but it would also help us, as although we have already published a good practice guide made up of examples of actions taken by authorities, we will be updating this following the second reporting round. So we will be using the 2022 reports as a source for examples to include in this updated guidance. Finally, you could then end with a review of the duty to include any key issues and or observations of how the duty has been implemented in the organisation. I've taken this outline from the reporting template that is in the reporting guidance document, so which is available on our website and also the WPP's website. The next 3 slides, I'll talk about some of the actions that can be taken that would benefit biodiversity, together with actual examples from reports from the first reporting round. They are divided into 3 groups, and these groups are based on an authority's land management responsibility and connection with biodiversity. The main reason for having authority divided into the groups like these is because there is a wide range of types and sizes of public authorities, which can range from a commissioner working from an office to the large local and national park authorities. Therefore, by using these groups, it should assist us in providing more tailored advice going forward. Having said that, many of the actions from one group can be adopted by organisations in other groups. And just to reiterate, it's important to note that actions taken only need to be appropriate to an authority's size and functions. Group 1, these organisations are the smaller authorities which only own or occupy an office building, such as commissions. they are limited to what they can do compared to an authority who has land management responsibilities. Their actions could include more general environmental considerations, such as adopting a sustainable procurement policy through buying locally produced goods, or influencing other organisations, such as including biodiversity beneficial conditions in grant or loan schemes. And could also include encourage sustainable travel within the organisation. The specific examples I've included here are the Children's Commissioner for Wales, where the Commissioner included the duty in his performance evaluation framework, and it also reports on how it is complying with the duty in its annual report. And also the Auditor General for Wales, where sustainability considerations are now embedded in their procurement practices, which includes providing training for procurement staff in sustainable procurement principles and undertaking sustainability risk assessments. On to the Group 2s now. Group 2 organisations have land management responsibilities. Examples of actions include green space management, such as changing mowing regimes for green areas around office buildings, which could include reducing the frequency of cuts, increasing the height of the mower blade, leaving areas to grow wild, and ensuring cuttings are removed. One example action comes from the Intellectual Property Office, where an area along a fence line will be left uncut to allow grass and brambles to grow. And any branches cut will be left on the ground to decay naturally, which will provide a habitat for a variety of insects. Another example is encouraging staff to volunteer in the context of nature and green spaces, such as Companies House, who've helped biodiversity and sort of raised awareness with staff, with allowing staff to do the volunteering schemes. Now on to Group 3. This group is made up of authorities whose functions involve the first two groups, but it can also influence those who own or manage land. Therefore, Group 3 is mainly made up of public authorities like national, local or national park authorities and town and community councils. Actions that encourage pollinators are good examples. This includes actions such as green space management, as referred to in the previous slide, but could also include ensuring biodiversity considerations are embedded into the planning process, increasing flower baskets and planters, ensuring that the flowers are locally sourced, pollinator-friendly varieties, and also using peat-free compost. Perhaps the most important aspect of the duty of the biodiversity consideration should be embedded throughout the authority. A good example of this is from Denbighshire Council, who have included biodiversity in the annual corporate performance reports. Another example of this is the much smaller authority, the purely office-based Children's Commissioner for Wales, who have included biodiversity in its performance evaluation framework. I'll end by listing the guidance, which includes, actually I'm running out of time a bit, so I'll just skip that. I mean, the guidance links will be available on the slides. But I'd just like to mention first about the local nature partnerships. And they're a great source of information and advice. I'd say they're experts in the field in terms of enhancing and protecting biodiversity. They're also aware of other projects going on in their local community, so they could link you up with other people who may be able to help. And one final thing before I finish, as a way of highlighting the importance of Section 6, there was a poll in the conference's opening session on Monday. As you may have heard, Welsh Government has been conducting a deep dive into biodiversity, which has been ongoing for the last 6 months. The recommendations for this were announced by the Minister on Monday's session, and this included a poll of which of the 8 recommendations were most important. One of the 2 that came out on top was the need to embed nature recovery in policy and strategy, and this goes to the root of what Section 6 is designed to achieve. Well, thank you for listening, and take any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. We've had a couple of questions. We're running a little short of time,
yeah.
But we've one of the questions was, will Welsh Government be reviewing the sort of performance of public authorities around this?
There was an evaluation carried out early in 2021, and we have taken on board. We came out with a number of recommendations and findings, and we have taken on board those. They did also look at the aspect of the way public authorities were sort of implementing the duty. And if you sort of base it on the amount of reports, it doesn't look that good, because the amount of reports produced for the first reporting round was only about 25% of authorities, which obviously is fairly low. But I think while it's obviously low, it's perhaps not as bad as it appears, because I think many authorities are taking actions to help biodiversity, and it was more of an issue about them having the time and the resources to actually report on them. I mean, for the first reporting round, we only published guidance towards the end of very close to the deadline, and so there wasn't. They only had a limited amount of time to organise things, and then authorities who were planning on publishing reports after the deadline then had issues caused by COVID, which hit in the spring of the following year.
Sure.
But I mean, going forward, there will be further evaluations carried out.
And are these going to be available? Are they online?
The evaluation is not online at the moment, but we will be looking into publishing it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're probably running out of time for questions. What we'll do, we'll attempt to answer some of the other ones. There weren't too many, but yeah, we'll try and answer those online if we can. The presentation is available, and I think one of the other questions was, does this duty apply to regulators like Ofgem and people Ofwat and people like that who are based in England and operating in Wales? My understanding is if they're operating in Wales, it should apply. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's correct, Steve. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there is the actors have quite detailed breakdown of what are public authorities, but even so, there are still some grey areas. But no, it does. A public authority operating in Wales is subject to the duty.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Jeff. It's really, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Our next presenter is Amber Connett from the Chartered Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management, and she's going to talk to us about how that Section 6 duty translates into planning policy in Wales through the net benefits approach, and we'll be looking at, so Amber and colleagues have produced guidance for members of SAIEM on what that duty looks like in the planning context and how it compares with other places. Okay, thanks. And please ask any questions in the chat bar as we go along.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thank you. So hi everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. So this will be a very brief overview of the Welsh Government's approach to biodiversity and ecosystem services in planning. We at SAIEM have recently published a briefing paper on this topic, which is available on the Hoover platform, and it's linked at the end of this as well. And we worked very closely with Welsh Government to produce it. So I'll later be joined by Steve and Siobhan Wiltshire from the planning policy team to help answer your questions at the end, because I'm sure most of them will be for them rather than me. So just to note that today's presentation will only be covering the terrestrial planning system, as obviously marine development is covered by different processes. And also another note is that if you'd like to know more about SAIEM as an organisation, I know Mandy Marsh has been on the Hoover platform and is offering any advice on anything to do with SAIEM, so please do send her any questions about that. So I will jump right in, and I'll start with some background on the policies and legislations that require delivery of net benefits for biodiversity, and then we'll go into more detail about what that actually means in practice. So the Environment Wales Act, which is listed here, I won't go into any detail on this, as Jeff has just covered it very nicely and in detail this morning, but it does require public authorities in carrying out their functions to maintain and enhance biodiversity. And also promote the resilience of ecosystems. We also have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is important here as it also requires national government, local health boards and other public bodies to carry out sustainable development and work towards the wellbeing goals. So under key policies and plans, we have Planning Policy Wales, which adds to this already, stating that planning authorities must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity in their exercise of their functions, which means that development should not cause any significant loss of habitats or populations of species, and must provide an overall net benefit for biodiversity. It also clarifies the requirement to promote the resilience of ecosystems as well. So next we have Future Wales, which is a national development plan, and it contains Policy 9, which is the Resilient Ecological Networks and Green Infrastructure Policy. This aims to further advance and mainstream biodiversity and ecosystem resilience in the planning system, which means that Welsh Government now requires strategic action to safeguard ecological networks. Strategic action should be taken within the strategic development plans. So these are development plans which span several local authority boundaries and sit between Future Wales and local development plans. Development proposals should also have regard to broader strategies such as green infrastructure assessments, which are listed here as well. In 2019, Welsh Government's Chief Planner further strengthened the policy by issuing a letter to the heads of planning to set out how biodiversity enhancements should be secured as part of a development proposal. And it stated that development applications which do not propose biodiversity enhancements will be refused unless they include other significant material considerations. So what do net benefits of biodiversity actually mean? So what are they and how do we implement those? The overall intent of the policy and legislation that I've just set out is for positive management of Wales's ecosystems and increasing resilience to become standard within development. Overall development should contribute to and not erode biodiversity and ecosystem resilience of both the site that it's on and also the wider ecosystem of Wales. The onus for delivering this is on the developer to demonstrate how the development will deliver it and also include evidence of site management and the resources that will be needed to do this for as long as is necessary. And then also, as I've mentioned, any planning proposal must demonstrate that it's both maintained and enhanced biodiversity and built resilient ecological networks. Biodiversity enhancements that achieve net benefits for biodiversity must be delivered following, so additional to the implementation of the stepwise approach, which is avoiding, minimising, mitigating, and then as a last resort, compensating for adverse impacts on the environment. Where the adverse effect on the environment clearly outweighs other material considerations, the development should be refused, and this process is detailed really well in Planning Policy Wales, the document. So I won't go into any more detail there, but a net benefit for biodiversity in itself, it can be achieved through a range of different actions, which depend on the scale of the development. So it can range from anything from bat and bird boxes to large-scale habitat creation and restoration, or long-term management of habitats as well. One key requirement in all of this is that measures put forward are suitable in the local context of the site and make a genuine contribution to ecosystem resilience. This can be assessed by referring to the local biodiversity action plans, checking priority habitats and species, local species records and other information as part of a preliminary ecological appraisal. I think the key point of that is that measures should just not be selected based on lowest cost or a quick tick box exercise. They should add a genuine contribution and enhancement. So now we come on to the DECCA framework. The Environment Wales Act, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Chief Planner's Letter all frame biodiversity with respect to its contribution to achieving ecosystem resilience. Planning Policy Wales in particular instructs planning authorities to take account of and promote the 4 attributes of ecosystem resilience, which are summarised here and which can be applied across different habitats and land uses and at a range of different scales. So first we have diversity, maintaining and enhancing diversity at every scale from genetic to between habitat levels. Then we have extent, which is maintaining and increasing the area of semi-natural habitat or features and linkages between them. Then we have conditions. So in assessing condition, we need to consider both direct and wider impacts. So things like climate change, invasive species, and how the land is managed. And then we have connectivity. So this refers to the links between the habitats, which could be physical corridors, stepping stones, or patches of habitat that connect together to create a network that enables the flow of genes and the movement of species across the landscape. And then finally, we have aspects of ecosystem resilience, so adaptability, recovery, and resistance, and they're all products of the above 4 attributes. So these are the key ways that ecosystem resilience is measured in the implementation of these policies. So talking about implementation, a few notes for ecologists and environmental managers who will be delivering this. I've already mentioned the key requirement of the measures put forward are that they're suitable in the local context of the site. So ecologists are really encouraged to take a whole system approach when conducting assessments. So looking at the biodiversity value of the site as it is, its ecosystem resilience using the Deca Framework, its ecosystem services or benefits that it provides, and its existing and potential linkages with the wider green infrastructure network. And that would include both protected sites and features that aren't protected, but that are crucial for the wider ecosystem resilience. If they're used as a last resort, off-site compensation should also be strategically planned to maximise benefits. For example, using area statements, habitat opportunity maps, and green infrastructure strategies. So area statements are produced by Natural Resources Wales, and they set out the natural resources present in each of the 7 areas covering all of Wales. They also include opportunity maps for building ecosystem resilience, the benefits these will provide, and then the main challenges and opportunities for these natural resources. So these could be, they could even be used at a really early stage to broadly inform what type of land could be scoped for purchase by developers, obviously followed by checks of designated sites, semi-natural habitats, green infrastructure assessments, and habitat networks. And this would allow developers to identify land that can deliver the most benefits of biodiversity or other ecosystem services while reducing the risk of negative impacts. We did want to highlight the importance of incorporating assessment of impacts on biodiversity and plans for achieving net benefits for biodiversity at the earliest opportunity, and also using industry best practice guidance for ecological assessments, such as provided by SAIM. This will help prevent any unnecessary delays and costs associated with these, and also improve the quality of plans and identify any issues with proposals that might mean that they don't meet the requirements and could be refused. Again, I've already noted that it must be additional to avoidance in compensation, and to ensure that net benefits are achieved, compensatory habitat may need to be significantly larger than that lost as a result of development, as it is a net gain, a net benefit. But the Chief Planner's letter does highlight that net benefits for biodiversity does not automatically need to be onerous, and should be proportional to the extent and impact of development. There is a risk that developments will default to simple measures, for example, that a small-scale development might be required to deliver. So how proportionality is interpreted consistently across local planning authorities and between developers is a key consideration, which would benefit from further guidance. But I will come back to challenges shortly. So the main bit for us, really, there have been reported instances of development proposals in Wales being submitted using England's biodiversity offsetting tools as evidence of the ecological impacts. So one of the main goals for us putting out this briefing is to set out the differences between the approaches across the UK, and what is required from each. So all of the UK nations do have a similar intent to ensure that there's no net loss of biodiversity, and increasingly they're requiring an overall positive impact on the natural environment. But there are a few key differences with how that's implemented and monitored. In England, the Environment Act mandated a 10% net gain in biodiversity for all new developments, with a few exemptions, with habitats to be secured for a minimum of 30 years. The key feature of the net gain approach is that it's measured using a metric developed by Natural England. So this uses habitat features, including the size, distinctiveness, condition, quality, strategic significance, and location, to determine how many biodiversity units are available, and then that must be compensated for plus a 10% gain. The net benefits for biodiversity approach by Welsh Government does have the same intent, to deliver an overall improvement in biodiversity, but it doesn't utilise a metric. It does put the emphasis on proactive consideration of biodiversity and wider ecosystem benefits within a placemaking context, and really emphasises that early in the design, doing this early in the design process. There's also no mandatory length of time that the management is required for in Wales. So one of the main issues with using the English tools in Wales is that it doesn't encompass the ecosystem resilience, which is an additional requirement. In Scotland, the draft National Planning Framework 4, which is the latest National Planning Framework, is due to be finalised this year, and it does state that development proposals should contribute to the enhancement of biodiversity. The Scottish Government has also not adopted a metric-based approach, again emphasising the design stage and individual assessment on sites. The development of this approach is still ongoing, though, so we don't know much detail yet about how that will be monitored and enforced. But we have been engaging with this as a body with Scottish Government. And then finally, in Northern Ireland, the approach is quite similar. So the Wildlife and Natural Environment Act in Northern Ireland placed a statutory duty on public bodies to look for opportunities to enhance or restore biodiversity, or provide an educational input to others about biodiversity. Implementing this duty does require new projects to follow the mitigation hierarchy that I set out earlier, and also set out how any additional enhancements could be included in an action plan. So my last sort of key points then, there are a few challenges that have been identified with the Welsh approach, and we've set out some recommended options for addressing these in our briefing paper. Firstly, the more flexible approach to delivery does raise the possibility of inconsistencies amongst local authorities. So one way to address this could be through an overarching net benefits for biodiversity checklist produced by Welsh Government that sets out minimum standards for delivery for all local planning authorities. Some sort of consistent checklist or other method is also needed for local authorities to decide whether off-site measures will be allowed if a developer claims they're unable to deliver net benefits for biodiversity on-site, or if it would be beneficial on a landscape scale. And also what constitutes significant material considerations that would mean it's not refused. There is evidence as well of a lack of wider understanding of the need to go beyond minimum requirements of mitigation or no net loss of biodiversity and actually provide enhancements. So there is really a need for a wide-scale promotion of the need for high-quality applications that achieve real net benefits to developers and their design teams. In the same vein, it's really important that ecologists working in Wales are aware of the differences to approaches in other countries, and the additional requirements and what can and can't be used between the countries. So that's really the key driver behind us producing this briefing paper and this talk today, and hopefully we'll continue to promote this to our members and beyond. And then another area that's been highlighted that there are a few additional challenges is in phased developments, so particularly really long-term phase developments when ecologist teams need to pick up the work of others for a later phase. If there is no clarity on how the enhancements will be delivered. So this really highlights the need for quality master plans and agreements on net benefits for biodiversity really early in the process. But on the other hand, net benefits for biodiversity should also be able to accommodate changes in habitats over time in a long-term development where needed. So this could really use a strategy for how it will be tracked and updated on a phase-by-phase basis. Communication has also been shown to be a bit of an issue in practice. So, for example, implementation of reporting requirements not being delivered correctly on site, which could lead to breaking wildlife law and not achieving the enhancements that are needed. So SAIM is working on developing an accreditation for ecological clerk of works to help address some of these issues and general improving practice. And then that leads me on to my final point, which is that enforcement of obligations and long-term management can also be difficult without sufficient resources within local authorities. So ensuring that all local authorities have access to ecological expertise and capacity should be prioritised if the aims of the policies and the laws that I set out in the first slide are to be met. So I have covered many of the key points in our briefing paper here today, but the full briefing paper is available on our resource hub. It's linked on screen and it's also in the Hoover app. And it does include some really useful reference documents and resources from Welsh Government and Natural Resources Wales as well. So definitely worth checking that out. And I'll now be joined by Steve and Siobhan, who will hopefully be able to answer your questions on the net benefits of a biodiversity approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. That was really clear. That's good. I've got some questions. I also found myself in an unusual position of maybe having to answer, help answer some of them myself as well. But hopefully Siobhan can deal with the sort of the planning policy ones. But I'll just jump in and yeah, we'll just do our best to give good answers to these. Wrong sheet. Right. Question from Tony Harrington. Do biodiversity enhancements need to be undertaken on the same site or could they be elsewhere? So you mic's off, Siobhan.
Sorry, everyone. Good morning. I'll jump in. In the first instance, absolutely. We'd like to see enhancements delivered on site. Sitting behind the general Section 6 policy, there's also a social justice policy driver as well, and we want to see the enhancement delivered where the impact takes place. So absolutely, in the first instance, enhancements on site.
Great. Yeah, I think that's the proximity principle.
Yeah.
But sometimes it could be a hybrid of all sorts of different ways, providing we that demonstrable maintenance and enhancement has taken place. Another question from Lindsay Mansell. Are Welsh Government considering making these requirements a validation requirement for planning applications across Wales? Not quite clear what that means, but maybe you do, Siobhan.
Yeah, it's a sort of a technical question.
Thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but just to answer it, it is a good idea. I know some authorities out there use validation, their validation checklists for things like green infrastructure requirements, and I know that they've had some success with doing that. It's definitely something that we can explore. Just to give some wider context, we will be coming out shortly with a consultation on revisions to Chapter 6 of Planning Policy Wales. So in Chapter 6, we've got all our green infrastructure, landscape and biodiversity policies, and we're looking to give further detail behind the stepwise policy to implement and deliver a net benefit for biodiversity. So we will be coming out for a consultation on that. Supporting that consultation, we can also put out there some general ideas, some general thoughts, alongside the detailed wording changes to policy. We can also explore some general ideas such as this, introducing sort of the need for net benefit to be embedded within the validation requirements. So it is something that we can explore, and there is good practice out there already.
Okay. Great. Hopefully that's helped with that question. Another one from Emma Broad. Would Welsh Government considering, can't read my own writing, consider helping local planning authorities with extra resources in terms of planning staff, because obviously, particularly ecologists, because this is more work.
Absolutely. It's something that we're very conscious of and very sympathetic towards. It's, as folk out there know, it's an issue that's sort of being experienced by other specialist services as well. It's not just ecology and biodiversity colleagues. And it is something that was recognised by the recent deep dive as well. So we do recognise the stress and strains that ecology services out there are under. Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to say on that, Steve. Anything sort of more corporate? I don't know, but it's tricky.
No, we are funding the local nature partnerships, which obviously helps towards this. But yeah, we recognise there is a real strain in the system there, which is kind of everywhere, I guess, in the public sector, and it's not going to get any better, I don't think. But yeah, we do need to look seriously at perhaps smarter ways of working as well, perhaps across authorities on that. Right, so we've got another couple of questions here. There was a question whether we should be considering in England they've got a 10% net gain target, and whether we should be doing something like that. I can answer myself. In terms of, it's helpful to have those sorts of figures sometimes, but is 10% enough? Yeah, 10% of what? How do you measure it? And yeah, I think that the problem with kind of metrics is in adding things up and totting it up is that nature just isn't a kind of linear system you can work in that way. The whole thinking behind the Act and the way we're working is to sort of look for any opportunities to do this and just to make sure we get a demonstrable net benefit out of this in terms of not just the biodiversity on the site, the habitats, the species, the resilience across the landscape. But yeah, we're looking for evidence to support all of those things rather than just a 10% figure of kind of bean counting. I'm not entirely sure. It's one way of doing it, but we're not entirely sure we agree with that. Right, another question. So is there a date for the publication of the forthcoming guidance on this at all?
Not yet, but hopefully we can get it out soon. And certainly when the consultation on the changes to PPW come out, we should have it available then, just so that folk know what this is. This is a really useful guide that's been prepared by SAIM that just helps planners out there start those conversations with developers when sort of application discussions kick off, and gives an idea of what enhancement could be sought as within the context of a scale of development. So hopefully we can get it out with the consultation on the changes to PPW.
Thanks. Yeah, Emma Broad's suggesting that we need some more training for planning officers in section 6 and Planning Policy Wales. Any plans to roll some of that out?
There are no plans at the moment, but absolutely take that on board. It's something really important, and these skills need to be constantly refreshed and kept up to date. So noted. Take that on board.
Okay, well, Emma's also suggested, would setting a percentage spend of development on this be helpful at all? It's just, I think just throwing that one in really.
It'd be nice. It would be nice, but no.
I don't know what you think about any of these things, Amber, either. But I mean, it's difficult to pin these things down, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there are a few studies that have come out of some of the challenges and some of the benefits of the English approach that might be useful to share, some of the lessons learned and some of the improvements that can be made. So I'll pop the link for that in the chat. I'll just take it out now. But I think you've covered everything.
Brilliant. Yes, we may well touch on some of that in the next part of the next presentation. I don't know. Just looking for some more questions here. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I haven't got any more specific questions. There are quite a lot of detailed questions on the chat bar, which we will have a look at, and we'll try and sort of. So lots of them are kind of just suggestions or things that if we were having this as a discussion would be very useful. But they're difficult to answer as questions in particular. So I think, and let's just see if there's anything else coming up here.
There was just one question in this. I can't remember where it was, but it was about the scale of ambition, and it's related to the 10% threshold. But just to say something against that, in terms of the policy that we do have in Future Wales, and the wording of Policy 9 does set a very, very high bar for maintaining an enhancement and delivering net benefit. And in that policy, we ask for, in all cases, that action is taken towards securing the maintenance and enhancement of biodiversity, and that must be demonstrated. So the scale of ambition is there. And just to sort of reference Policy 9 of Future Wales, and let folk know that detail is contained in the policy.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it's it's setting out the evidence that has been done. I think it is quite a high bar.
Yeah,
and I think we need to be focusing on the kind of guidance to help people understand what that looks like, probably. And yeah, just another comment about about using percentage spend, that's people do use it for art, for example. It's an option, but it's not one we've thought about. And right, okay. Well, I think we draw. Thank you, Amber. That was really clear, and it's really good to get this actually set out in one place at last. Actually, which is a good briefing for your members who work in this area all the time, and really helpful for other people as well. Thanks.
No problem,
Okay.
thank you.
So we're going across now to Dr. Lena Congreve, who's going to kind of look after you for the next hour. I understand. I think you're all going to be sort of taken off into various rooms after I think Alina's had introduced what she's going to do. So over to you. Is that okay?
Hello everyone, and yes, good morning. That's really fascinating set of discussions there, and it will be good in the next part to be able to perhaps go into some smaller groups and to be able to look at those together and to be able to discuss them, because with a group of about 90 of us here, it is quite difficult to have some of those smaller group and individual conversations. Perhaps we should just give it a minute or two. Organisers, I don't know if we should actually wait till dead on 11 o'clock, or if we can get going. Organiser or chair, are you happy for me to carry on, or do we need to wait a minute or two in case anyone's joining at dead on 11? Yeah, and if you
sorry, I think maybe leave it just a minute and perhaps talk.
Yeah. Okay. So if any of you are desperate, then we can have a minute, and you can go fill the beverage of your choice. So we've had it's had quite a busy morning. So if you need to grab a cup of tea and coffee, you could do that now, and we will start in 1 minute. So you have got time to get a hot drink before we restart.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks.
So just while we're settling down again and getting ready to restart, I've got a short poll for you just to take the temperature in the room a bit. So perhaps if the host could launch poll 1, and interested to see what your thoughts are about some of the differences between England and Wales. So yeah, perhaps if you could launch that first poll to take the temperature in the room before we start. So oh, that's not poll 1. Poll 1 is, which statement best describes your views on biodiversity in Wales post-Brexit? Yeah, that's the one. That's great. Okay, we'll get to the other one at the end. So, which statement best describes your views on biodiversity policy in Wales post-Brexit? So, is Wales head of England? Is England head of Wales? So, about their ambition there, you're not sure. So, yes, keep those votes coming in. I can see lots of you voting. Yes, just go with whatever your first instinct is. Don't feel you need to overthink it. And this is entirely anonymous. Okay, I can see almost half of you have voted now. It's coming in thick and fast. Okay, last couple of seconds if you want to. Oh, yes, a few more. Okay, so I think we'll draw a line to that one there. And could you share the result? Oh, quickly. Okay, if you could share the results, that'd be great. Okay, can we share the results on the screen, please?
Sorry, just having a problem getting it to share the results to the screen.
I don't think I'm allowed to do important things like that, so.
Yeah, sorry, for some reason it's not letting me share the results.
Ooh. Okay. While you're figuring that out, perhaps if I do the first couple of slides and then when it appears, we can share it. So if I start sharing my screen then. Oh, can you see my screen now?
No, it's not sharing at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Excellent. So in this session, we'll be looking together at environmental policy post-Brexit. And this is very much billed as a workshop. So you've had a lot of presentations so far in the conference. And really the point of the session is to give you more of a chance to talk to each other about some of these topics. So we'll be spending about half of our time together in small group discussions, in groups about sort of 5 or 6 to get a chance to really talk some of these through and share your experiences with some of your peers. But to set the stage a bit for that and to frame some of those smaller group discussions, we've very much seen over the last 2.5 years how things that happen right over the other side of the world can have a really big impact on our day-to-day work, on our nature reserves, in our local authority, where we are now. And I mean, who would have thought that things starting very far away in China would have such big impacts on how we work and what we do here in Wales, here in the UK. Many organisations in 2019 and 2020 also declared a climate emergency in recognition of the huge challenges and threats that brings to our society. But as well, we also are facing a biodiversity crisis, and it's important to note that the government in Wales has also declared a biodiversity emergency, a biodiversity crisis. And Arguably, that's an even bigger risk in many ways than the climate crisis, because many of the tools we need to mitigate and adapt to climate change, those won't work if the habitats that are supposed to be doing that mitigation adaptation are highly degraded. So we need those ecosystems in place to be able to address the challenges of the climate crisis. As professionals working in ecology, this can all seem quite overwhelming, but it's important to remember we've got a lot to bring to it too, both in terms of our technical expertise, but also our way of thinking about things. That as ecologists, we're used to thinking about natural systems and how natural systems work. So it's quite easy to think that leaving the EU, we're perhaps leaving a lot of those international connections and international obligations behind, but far from it. The UK is still a signatory to dozens of multilateral environmental agreements, these MEAs. And we were very involved with setting these up in the first place. So it was with scientists working here, were very involved in setting up the Ramsar Convention, the Bonn Convention, the Bern Convention. So our ecological expertise is really deeply embedded in those international agreements, and those have been brought into law in our own legislation through the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So these international obligations that we're a signatory to are still deeply embedded, and even some of the sort of the heritage ones, like World Heritage Sites, there's still great biodiversity value alongside heritage in those designations as well. So just because we've left the EU, we haven't left behind our commitments as a signatory to those important international obligations that protect species, migratory species, and important habitats. But the one perhaps to think particularly about at the moment is the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is one of the big things that emerged from the Rio Earth Summit in '94. And that led to that growth of biodiversity action plans, both national biodiversity action plans, local authorities having their own biodiversity action plans, big organisations developing their biodiversity action plans. So that movement to plan for biodiversity in a particular place came out of the Rio Earth Summit. That process was refreshed in 2010, 2011 with the ACHE targets. What felt was like what's called a lost decade for biodiversity, where we really didn't make progress for about 10 years between really 2010 and 2020. And there'll be a longer presentation this tomorrow, but we're now seeing a big refresh of that target, that we are now approaching the big international conference, COP15, for biodiversity. That's going to be taking place finally in Montreal in December. And it's really a once in a decade opportunity to revisit those big targets and those big ambitions internationally. And at the moment, it's very much in the balance. Will it be biodiversity's Paris moment, where we really step ahead and really make progress? Or will it be more of a Copenhagen moment, where we just can't set aside our differences internationally and we don't make progress? So a lot of eyes are on those big decisions that will be made in Montreal in a few weeks' time. A lot of the things we've been talking about earlier, some of those targets and some of those numbers are coming out of our need to meet those big international agreements. So the 30 by 30, the 30% of land by 2030, that's coming out of that process. Targets for restoration, for using habitats to sequester carbon. Lots of those things are coming out of that COP15 process, and Wales having that devolved responsibility for biodiversity and other important sectors that relate to biodiversity as well. The government in Wales will have to do its part in meeting those international obligations. For the first time, there's also a big emphasis on not just biodiversity policy, but eliminating harmful subsidies in other sectors that harm biodiversity, in particular things like fishing and farming. So it's all very well putting funding into biodiversity with one hand, but not putting public funding with another hand, that through farming and fishing subsidies that are poorly designed, that then cause damage to biodiversity. Still, lots of these targets and the wording around those are open to discussion and disagreement. The one thing most people do seem to agree on is the benefits of urban nature. So one of the bits of text that has been finalised is how important nature is for people living in towns and cities. And perhaps it's a thing coming out of COVID that we've really all come to recognise the benefits of people having access to nature close where they live. This has been taken forward in England through the Environment Act, so the largest piece of legislation to come through in England in the last 20 years. It's fulfilled a national framework in England, so it's legislation that underpins the English 25-year environment plan. It's also fulfilling that regulatory gap, so it's plugging all the things that Europe used to do with new domestic bodies and new domestic ways of working. The Fanteision, which is a new regulator, the Office for Environmental Protection, which has a small part to play in Wales in areas of legislation that aren't devolved, but it's almost entirely an English regulator. There are targets in the Environment Act to address decline of both species and habitats, including the power for Secretary of State to set long-term legally binding targets. I guess partly a technicality initially, but the Secretary of State in England now has powers to amend the habitat regulations, and that could just be a technical exercise, but in practice it looks like the Secretary of State could quite soon be using those powers. It places new duties on public bodies of biodiversity. It provides the underpinning for net gain, which has been piloted for a number of years, but this provides the legal basis for that. It introduces new measures called conservation covenants. So for many years, it's been difficult to secure positive land management. It's often quite easy to say what you don't want a landowner to do, but securing positive conservation as part of land stewardship has often been legally difficult. Conservation covenants exist in other countries, and it's looking at how we now bring those as positive conservation measures to the UK. Other measures around trees, around soils, ways in which some of these measures are brought together in a locality through conservation strategies, reinvigorating some of that early 2000s processes around species conservation strategies and reporting for local authorities, and bedding in some of the changes in species licensing in the UK through the use of district level licensing. So how are we doing with polls? Are we able to share a poll yet? Is that
I think so. One moment. Okay. Sorry, the formatting's gone off, but there you have the results.
See that? Do we have that poll?
Yeah, sorry, the poll is in the chat. It's just formatting is a bit off.
Oh, right. Can't see that. Can other people see that? Maybe I can't see because I'm a presenter.
Yes.
Yes, you can see it. Okay, that's great. I can't, which is slightly strange, but we'll go with that. Yes, okay, the participants can see, which I guess is the important thing. Okay, so okay, right. Oh no, some people can't see the poll. That's weird.
Do you want me to read out what it says, Alina?
Yes, if you could, thank you.
Okay, so the top option is Wales is more ambitious but has problems with delivery at 57%.
Right.
Equal numbers of people thought that Wales was ahead of England and England was ahead of Wales, interestingly enough, both at 14%.
Okay.
2% of people felt that England was more ambitious but had problems with delivery, and 14% were not sure and hence had come to the seminar.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with that one. And at the risk of attempting tech further, could we launch the second poll then? So I've talked very briefly about some of the measures in the Environment Act in England, and we talked about this in the session before where we were looking at net gain. But it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on what some of those measures, with some modifications for the Wales context, and not just taking them and lifting them across, but which of these measures could be valuable additions to the policy framework in Wales. So, and you can tick as many as you like for these, so you're not confined to one option. Tick all of the ones you think, with some changes for the local context, could be suitable additions to the Wales context. So that poll should be open now. So you're, is that live now? I can't see any responses yet. Can we?
It's on my screen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes, coming in now. I'm telling you everything. That's great. Oh, coming in thick and fast. Okay, I've had about 40 of you reply so far. Just give the rest of you another couple of minutes to share your thoughts.
We've got the a live tally on the chats. If you, Alina, if you.
Oh, you can see that as well, can you? Okay.
I think, yeah. So on the chats, there's a live tally going on, so you can see it as it happens. Yeah.
Else can see that. Okay.
I think that's what it is anyway.
Yes,
It's changing.
Techie this morning. Okay, so yeah, that's really interesting. So I won't close the poll then, as that appears to be working. So yes, the most popular one there is the legally binding targets. So yes, a fifth of you think that legally binding targets would be an important thing to introduce. Also some traction around local nature recovery strategies to bring things together. And there are perhaps some things around net gain and the way that's brought in England that these might be useful in a Wales context. Less support for district level licensing and reinvigorating species conservation strategies. Okay. Yes, that's quite right, Liz. So the conservation covenant means requirements on the land. So if the land is sold, then it goes across with that thing. So it changes those issues around land ownership. Conservation covenants also make it more difficult for, it's often quite difficult in legal terms to say what you do want a landowner to do. So it helps with that one as well. But yes, the main point is that with the land ownership shifts, the legal obligation shifts with the new owner. And okay, various questions coming in. I will try and get to those later, but time is marching ahead. So yes, conservation covenants could be brought in through Section 106. So Section 106 could be the legal mechanism that you use to bring in a conservation covenant, Emma. Yeah. Okay, so it's now time for you to stop being talked at and start talking to each other. So if I briefly introduce the breakout rooms and what we'll be looking at there. So we're now going to go into breakout rooms for discussion, and you'll have 20 minutes once you're in your breakout room. For some of the key environmental policies that are in the Environment Act in England, do you think they could be introduced in Wales? If you do think some of those measures have got some legs in Wales, how should they be modified or amended so they're better suited to the Wales context? And then once you've had a chat about it, you've put some post-it notes down for whether you think it could be introduced, how it could be amended, then you're going to have a little vote. So for each measure, it's either a must-have, so this is a measure we should introduce, or a don't try this at home. And in your discussions, it'd be really helpful if you could add post-it notes to your board and bring some of those rich discussions to your post-it so that we can keep track of where things are. And so you'll be sent out into, I'll put a link in the chat, something called Jamboard. That's what your Jamboard will look like. When you're in your breakout rooms, you'll be assigned breakout room 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll see at the top right hand corner that you'll be able to scroll through. Actually, if I get that like this and go into So that's what your Jamboard will look like. You'll see you've got a group number up there. You'll also see on the left-hand corner, you can make sticky notes here by pressing on that button, and then you can move these across to Don't Try at Home. So you don't have to sign up for anything or register anything. You follow the link into it, and then you'll be into it. So the same breakout room that you're in breakout group 16, go to groups, go to page 16, scroll through the Jamboard till you get that one. Otherwise, you'll be writing in someone else's group and you'll be giving them all your ideas, which we don't want to have. That'll be confusing. So I'm going to post the link in the chat now to those Jamboards. So if you follow that link, that should take you into the board. And we're not going to be recording any of your discussions when you're in the breakout rooms. So those discussions will be entirely confidential. So hopefully you should be able to follow that link and access the board. Oh, yeah, I can see a few people are arriving. That's great. Okay. Any technical problems with that, stick a note in the chat. Okay, so could you now open the breakout groups, please, in Teams? And you're going to be automatically assigned to breakout groups of about 5 or 6 people. Please don't create more than 20 breakout groups, because that's the maximum number of boards I've got.
Okay, they should be being assigned into rooms now.
Okay, cheerio. See you all in 20 minutes. Is that everyone back now, or are some people still in their breakout rooms?
That should be everyone back. The rooms are showing as closed now.
Ah, that's great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some fruitful discussions there. I've been keeping there's a little bit of an eye on your Jamboards and some of the really interesting stuff you've been talking about. So it's I guess there were some sort of common themes coming out there around your desires to, I guess, to customise things and make things specific for a Wales context. So there seems to be I guess, a particular interest in conservation covenants as a useful tool, and that perhaps having some applicability brought into the Wales context. There doesn't seem a great deal of appetite for a major revisitation of SSIs, SPAs and SACs, but perhaps strengthening what's there. There's a concern if you did throw everything in the air, that might dilute protection. It could take a lot of time and energy to do that. But perhaps there does need to be ways in which we should speed some of that up, look at what the practical management and look at more the ways around financial support for how sites are managed properly. The new regulator was something there were quite mixed views on, that some people felt that it'd be better to just strengthen the role of Natural Resources Wales and to give that more teeth and more budget. There was a questioning of the need to have an entirely new regulatory body, whereas others felt there is a regulatory gap at the moment, and that the oversight that was provided through Europe provides a real governance hole at the moment, and there is a role to plug that regulatory gap that leaving Europe has left us with. But that any kind of new system must have some kind of teeth, so however you do replace it. And there is perhaps a case for not overcomplicating it and perhaps just strengthening the powers of NRW instead, rather than creating more complex regulatory structures. It's also great that a lot of you got your teeth into some stuff we were talking about in the last session. And there were really very varied sets of views around whether we have a metric or not, or percentages. And I hope those were some fruitful discussions that you had. That I think even within some groups, some of you thought it was a must-have, and some of you thought you don't try it at home. So I think that's one where there's still perhaps a lot of thinking to do about whether there are any things from the system in England that that perhaps have some relevance to Welsh context, or whether Wales should really be treading its own path of that. But hopefully having that time in small groups to talk about it gave you all some time to think about perhaps some of the approaches that might not work best in Wales, which is quite hard to explore in a larger group setting. So if I just sort of share my last couple of slides, and then we've got one last poll for you. So where are we? So as has come out in the discussion already, and from some measures being brought forward at the moment, there's a real lack of knowing where we are in Wales with data and environmental quality, and the issues that leads for knowing if interventions are successful or not, and the evidence that we need to inform our policy making decisions. So the graph is for SSIs, but that there is a lack of data to inform whether we are making progress or not across a wide range of biodiversity indicators. Even our most important sites are not secure, and intense pressure from different land uses and funding streams for positive management remain an issue. There are also issues with a disconnect, so people involved in that very practical day-to-day stuff, and making sure their voices are heard for those involved in designing policy. And hopefully this conference and the meetings we've been having the last couple of days have gone some way towards renewing those connections and making sure that people involved with a policy design are very aware of the challenges people on the ground are facing. And as we come up to the refresh of COP15, to perhaps reconsider again the roles of our national parks, our other protected landscape areas in the positive role they can play around protecting biodiversity. With the challenges that SSIs place, that shows even more starkly at our local wildlife sites. So that local authority woodland we heard about in the last session, that the protection and monitoring and management of that little amenity woodland that's used by people in that area, that those areas are receiving even less attention and protection. So that leads us to question how good the current system is, and how we might move on going forward. A lot of the structures we have date from the very origins of conservation, the acts we brought forward immediately after the Second World War. But we live in a very different world now, one of climate change, of microplastics, of alien invasive species. And there are moves to think about, well, perhaps biodiversity should be on a similar footing to Climate Change Act, and the kind of targets and budgets that we have for climate change have at least driven action forward in that. To strengthen some of the positive land management we have for things like conservation covenants, and to align the work we do. So we do have both a climate change and a biodiversity crisis, but how we can make those two things work in parallel and be mutually reinforcing. And as well as setting targets for biodiversity, should we also be looking at how we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to access and to enjoy the natural world. And with that, I'd like to have the last poll. So how you feel at the end of that session and what your thoughts are. So perhaps if we could have the last poll then about which one of these statements best sums up your views on the situation in Wales. So perhaps if we could have that last poll launched in the chat, it'd be again interesting to take the temperature in the room and see how your thoughts are at the end of what's been a very stimulating sort of discussions this morning. Okay, I can see those coming in. So a dozen of you voted so far. So do keep your votes coming in. Yes, quite right, Neil. The lack of concern about connecting and the connectivity for SSIs, and using those local sites to do that is a really important issue. And yes, do join the sessions this afternoon. They're going to be looking at that. Yes, and so you're quite right, Deborah, that those local wildlife sites are really key in creating that connectivity for our SSIs and our internationally important sites. Okay, so I think we've got 25 responses to the poll. Would you like to share the results of those, please, so we can hopefully all see that?
Just give me one moment.
Okay.
Sorry, just coming up.
Okay, has that appeared?
Be with you 1 second.
Oh,
Okay.
Right. Okay, so I think that's great that most of you are leaving this session optimistically, so that half of you think there is a real opportunity now for Wales to design and deliver world-leading policy in biodiversity. I also sense some frustration there that some of you also feeling Wales is moving too slowly, and if we don't seize that opportunity, there's a chance to be left behind. Hopefully the session we've had this morning and the rest of the conference have helped stimulate some of that and help move things forward. I'm also very pleased to be continuing working with SIEM on this issue and delivering training in Wales. Training came out a lot earlier on this morning, and really pleased that SIEM have been paying and supporting for customised law and policy courses in Wales that really are designed for the special context in Wales and the planning legislation in Wales, rather than, as we've seen already, the very divergent situation in England. So looking forward to working with Mandy and her colleagues at SIEM over the next few months to deliver both online and hopefully in person some more Wales specific training around law and policy. So we've got a few minutes left if there are any last questions or points we'd like to raise in the chat. So do stick those in those now. If I've missed anything, perhaps the organisers could flag those up. So yeah, do feel free to put any last questions or comments in the chat. And hope you found those breakout rooms a good opportunity to discuss things with your peers. So Steve, is there anything that we need to pick up from in the chat?
There's well, Deborah Hill raised the issue about sinks, the importance of the sites of importance for nature conservation, the ones that sit below SSIs, that they have a really important role to play here.
Yes, and the joined upness. So as we're just saying, we can't just stick a fence around a SSI and so it's protected. It needs to be connected to be able to function ecologically, and sinks have a really important role in that connectivity and a really important social role as well. So most people in their access to nature are not visiting SSIs and SPAs and SACs, they're visiting local sites of importance for nature conservation, and getting those in a good state of habitat management is really important to meet those kind of commitments to ensure equal access to nature as well.
Yeah, there's also mention of the nature networks approach. Yeah, that way that we've got a program looking at trying to connect SSIs, SACSPAs, etc., and provide buffers. That's a program which we're working on with NRW, or NRW are leading now.
Yes, there's really important work there, and I think one that perhaps also shows our depth to some of the European legislation, and that the importance of that has also come out of the need to not have recreational pressures on SPAs and SACs, but to instead supply other suitable recreational and amenity areas rather than that taking place in our most sensitive wildlife sites.
Yeah, I haven't got anything else that I can see, but yeah, no other questions I've seen. recently, anyway.
Okay, it's been a real pleasure, I guess, virtually meeting you all this morning, and it's interesting to see from slightly remotely all those interesting discussions that were happening in your breakout groups through the Jamboard. Wishing you all the best of luck with your work and a very good rest of conference, and perhaps hope to see some of you at some SAIM Wales events in later in the year or in the new year.
Great. Thank you very much, Alina. That's really good. And a good plug for SAIM. I'm also a member, so, you know, good organisation. Thank you. Right. Just to say, really, well, thanks to all of our speakers this morning, to Jeff, Amber, and Alina. I think we've had a really good sort of canter through some of our sort of legislation and policy in terms of the Section 6 biodiversity duty, how that sort of translates into our planning system through the net benefits approach. We've had discussions about how that compares with net gain and those sorts of things. And Alina's has guided us through some really interesting discussions about what's happening in England and whether we should be considering some of the things they're doing in England and maybe they should be considering some of the things we're doing here. But yeah, there's lots more work to do, that's for sure. And so that keeps us all very busy.
England as well, from what's happening in Wales and Scotland. So
yeah.
I'm very frustrated when I go to policy updates and it's entirely England focused and you get none of that opportunity for learning for what's happening in Wales and Scotland. So I'd very much like some of the national policy organisations in England to include some of the really interesting practice that's happening in the other UK countries.
Well, ministers here are absolutely determined that there should be no undermining of environmental sort of the protection of the environment generally. That's absolutely clear. We need to be going the other direction. Well, thanks also to all the participants. Well, I can't say it. To all of the attendees today, and thanks for your questions and for taking part in this session. It's been really interesting. Apologies, I've been a bit flaky. I've actually got COVID, so I've been trying to sort of bravely go through this. It's been okay though. But a really good morning session. Thank you very much. And just to remind people that that the information on this and this session has been recorded. It will be available on the Wales Biodiversity Partnership website. And I think there's sort of obviously still information will be on the Hoover website as well, and on the conference joining instructions. Have a good conference, the rest of the conference as well, and thank you all very much.